Hello everyone, and welcome to my The Bold Fans channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Taylor has always been the glue that kept her family together. Her husband, Eric Brooks, was a charming businessman with the ability to light up a room, but his ambition frequently kept him away from home. Taylor's two children, Lily and James, were the pride of his life. Lily, a rising artist with a fiery temperament, and James, a quiet scholar with ambitions to become a doctor. Willow Creek envied the Brooks family, who lived carefully managed lives of contentment. But as Taylor would soon discover, photographs might conceal flaws beneath their shiny frames. It began on a cool autumn evening, with the air smelling like wood smoke and the leaves glowing crimson under the setting sun. Taylor was preparing for the Rich Manor Harvest Ball, which had been a family tradition for decades. The ballroom was a frenzy of activity, with caterers preparing tables, florists weaving rose and ivy garlands, and musicians tuning instruments. Taylor glided through the commotion with her customary grace, her emerald gown catching the light as she meticulously examined each detail. However, her heart wasn't in it. Eric had been distant for weeks, his customary warmth replaced by a distracted demeanor. She attempted to dismiss it as work-related stress, but a persistent dread crept into her chest. As the guests began to arrive and their laughter filled the vast hall, Taylor noticed Eric across the room. He was speaking with a woman she didn't know, a stunning figure in a black dress who clung to her like a shadow. Their chat was too personal, too intense, for simple acquaintances. Taylor's stomach wrenched, but she forced a grin and greeted her guests, anxious to maintain appearances. The night went on, and her suspicions became stronger with each stray glance between Eric and the stranger. By midnight, the event was in full flow, with golden chandeliers illuminating the swirling dancers. Taylor excused herself, retreating to the stillness of the manor's library to collect her breath. The library, with its towering bookcases and leather-bound volumes, had always served as her sanctuary. She slid into an armchair, her hands trembling as she tried to dispel the memory of Eric's palm stroking the woman's arm. That's when she noticed the door squeak open. Eric stood in the doorway, face pale and eyes dark. "Taylor, we need to talk," he continued, his voice soft and uncertain. She stood, her heart beating, sensing the weight in his tone. He locked the door behind him, blocking off the distant music and laughter. The stillness between them was oppressive. "What is it, Eric?" she inquired, her voice barely above a whisper. She wanted him to chuckle, to tell her she was being silly, and that everything was well. But his expression said otherwise. He took a deep breath as his hands clenched at his sides. "I am leaving, Taylor. I'm done." The words struck her like a physical blow, each one sharp and uncompromising. 5 simple words, but they held the weight of 1,000 betrayals. Taylor's knees buckled, and she grabbed the edge of the desk to keep herself stable. Tears pricked her eyes, but she refused to cry. "What do you mean you're finished?" she demanded, her voice cracking. "Finished with what? Are you with us? With our family?" Eric turned aside, his jaw tightening. "I've been attempting to make this work, but I can't anymore. I have met someone else." Taylor's breath seized in her throat as she searched for someone who understood her and saw her for who she truly is. The woman wearing the black outfit. The murmurs and stares made clear now. "Who is she?" she inquired, her voice shaking with a mix of rage and sadness. "Her name is Claire," Eric said, his tone almost aggressive. "She's different. She makes me feel alive again." The room revolved around Taylor. Is he alive again? What exactly did that mean? Had their 20-year marriage, 2 children, and innumerable memories meant so little? She reflected on the night she had stayed up waiting for him, the sacrifices she had made to support his aspirations, and the love she had poured into their family. And now, with 5 words, he was pulling everything apart. "Eric, please," she asked, her voice breaking. "We can fix it. We can go to counseling and speak things out. Think of Lily and James. They need you. I need you." Eric shook his head, his eyes frigid. "I am sorry, Taylor. I've made up my mind." As he turned to leave, Taylor felt something break inside him. "Don't walk out that door," she yelled, her voice echoing through the still room. "You can't just throw something away without explaining yourself. How about our children? What about everything we have created together?" Eric halted, his hand on the handle, but did not turn around. "You'll be fine, Taylor," he stated calmly. "You always are." And with that he was gone, the door closing behind him. Taylor slumped to the floor, sobbing in waves as the reality of his words set in. She was alone, and the weight of his betrayal crushed her. The harvest ball continued outside, the music a harsh mockery of the life she imagined she had. The days that followed were a jumble of anguish and despair. Taylor attempted to keep up appearances for the sake of Lily and James, but her children were not idiots. Lily, with her strong intuition, knew something was wrong right away. "Where is Dad?" she inquired one morning, her paint-splattered hands resting on her latest canvas. Taylor faked a smile, but her tone betrayed her. "He's just away for a bit," she added, the lie feeling harsh. James was quieter, but his concern was clear in the way he lingered closer, providing small tokens of comfort, a cup of tea, a book he thought she'd enjoy. Taylor wanted to protect children from the truth, but she realized she couldn't keep it hidden forever. When she eventually sat them together and told them that Eric had left, the silence was deafening. Lily's face crumpled as she walked out the door, slamming it behind her. James only gazed at the floor, fists clenched. Willow Creek buzzed with whispers. Gossip spread like wildfire, with each rumor worse than the last. Taylor overheard snippets at the grocery store, coffee shop, and even the library. Speculation about Eric's affair, Claire, and how Taylor had to let herself go to lose him. Eric wasn't the only one betrayed. The entire town did as well, as acquaintances she'd known for years turned their backs or cast pitying glances. Taylor resorted to routine to survive. She prepared lavish meals for Lily and James, went to every school event, and kept Ridge Manor pristine, as if order could hold her fractured world together. But at night, when the house was quiet, loneliness set in. She would lie awake, repeating Eric's remarks and wondering where she had gone wrong. Had she been overly concentrated on the children? Too preoccupied with the manor's demands? Or had Eric simply ceased loving her long before she realized? As winter fell over Willow Creek, Taylor discovered a note hidden inside one of Eric's old jackets. Claire wrote it in an exquisite looping script. The words were like daggers. "I can't wait to begin our lives together." Taylor's hand shook as she read the paper, which crumpled in her grip. Free. It seemed as if their marriage and family had been caged. She could have destroyed the letter or let her rage consume it. Instead, she kept it, storing it in a drawer as a reminder of the sorrow she'd endured. She was not prepared to forgive Eric, but she was determined to rebuild. For herself. For Lily and James. Spring signaled a tentative renewal. Taylor started simple, enrolling in a pottery class she'd always wanted to try. Her hands, which were previously used primarily for hosting and caring, acquired a new purpose in molding clay. She laughed for the first time in months as her first vase crumbled into a lopsided mess, and the sound felt like a success. Lily began to join her, and their shared silences in the studio helped to reconcile their breach. James, too, opened up, discussing his desire to go medical school as well as his anxieties about leaving home. Ridge Manor, once a symbol of her ideal life, became a canvas for reinvention. Taylor extended its doors to the community, organizing art workshops and literary clubs that filled the halls with fresh voices. The chatter subsided, replaced by appreciation for her fortitude. She wasn't the same Taylor Brooks who'd stood in the ballroom that fateful night, but she was stronger, fortified by the fire of heartbreak. Taylor had to learn to deal with the consequences of Eric's absence. She wasn't sure whether she'd ever fully recover, but she knew she could build something new from the ashes. She felt a sense of calm as she stood in the garden one spring morning, watching Lily paint and James read beneath a blossoming cherry tree. The 5 words that rocked her world no longer defined her. Taylor Brooks, and she was enough. He sat in the dimly lit room, the door slightly ajar, moonlight slicing through the breach and landing on the floor in a faint strip. Her side of the bed remained undisturbed, the linens cool and empty, but the air still trembled from what had happened. When she said those 5 words, he felt a sharp chill. Words were so small and light, but they held a weight that made his knees buckle. They weren't curses or great declarations, but they cut more deeply than any blade. "I cannot stay here." She had mumbled them nearly under her breath, as if she was afraid she would shatter if she said them out loud. He looked, his heart racing. She turned away. The thread between them stretched taut, like a silver wire about to snap. He attempted to speak. His throat felt thick and his tongue heavy. He expected her to tell him she was joking, that she would stay, and that this was just another impossible situation that they would conquer as they had before. However, she didn't. The guy in the doorway trembled. The streetlights outside created extended shadows that flickered on the walls behind her. She seemed smaller and lighter, more delicate. He grabbed for her, but his hand met just air. The phantom of her presence lingered, and she drifted away. He followed her, the floors groaning and each step sounding like a hollow drumbeat. She paused. She turned just enough for him to see the tears glinting in her eyes, the tremble in her lower lip, and the grief she was attempting to conceal. But she did not turn back. She didn't move closer. She did not speak again. He watched as she slid down the wall and crouched, arms around her knees. Her body shook from sobbing. He recognized her fury, anguish, and perplexity. But he also saw her pride, her conviction that sometimes love requires letting go. He wanted to hold her, tell her she was incorrect, and that can't stay was not an option for him. But when he took another wobbly stride, she gazed at him, her eyes full of finality rather than fury. He let her be. He walked back to the bedroom in eerie silence, each step heavier than the last. He dropped onto the bed, face buried in pillows, allowing his sobs to soak the linen. His chest heaved with sobbing that he could not stop. They initially met beneath sunnier skies, where laughing flowed freely and their hands brushed without reluctance. They lived a life full with internal jokes and shared dreams. She painted wildflowers on small canvases, and he carved them into wood. She adored the wind in her hair. He remembered how it curled around her neck. They had days of intense illumination and nights of soft silence. Moments that felt forever, as if nothing could ever pierce the fabric of their time together. But life, in its subtle brutality, began to undermine them. She lost her voice due to exhaustion, and the words she had wanted to utter became lodged in her throat. He hid his anguish in hard hours and late dinners, hoping to mend what was tearing behind closed doors. They spoke less. They made fewer touches. The gap crept in gradually at first, a gaze unreturned, a question unasked. Then followed the treachery of silence. Not a great dramatic confession, but minor omissions, half-truths, and missed glances. She stopped telling him about her anxieties. He stopped listening. She still loved him, even in her calmer moments. The way her fingers wrapped around his jacket, the way her eyes lingered when she thought he wasn't watching. But those unspoken moments could not overcome the ache that had developed between them. One night she awoke shocked. The space next her was unoccupied. He was gone. She chased him down the hallway, calling his name like a prayer. He stopped at the door. He gazed at her, shocked and perplexed. She gasped out something, his name a question, before falling silent. That night, the divide became a chasm. Weeks have passed. Their home seemed hollow. Her canvas remained undisturbed. His tools remained unused. The awful hush invaded every corner. She went for a walk on a late autumn evening. His footsteps followed. She paused beneath a street lamp. Her hair shone with an amber radiance. He approached her but didn't get too close. They stood in the silence of the night, the air frigid. She began to speak hesitantly. Then she stared at him, her eyes gleaming. She muttered, "I can't stay here." His heart wrenched. The words stayed with him longer than the silence that followed. She grabbed for his hand, but he pulled away. She did not move closer. She did not beg. When she turned to leave, he tried again. "Stay," he replied. His voice crackled. She paused in the doorframe of that city street, the lights behind her fading. She pushed one hand to her chest, as if bracing herself. Then she turned away and walked into the darkness. He waited until she was a silhouette, and then she went completely. He remained there till the cold drove him home. In the following evenings, his dreams were filled with pictures of her. The contour of her jaw, the laugh lines around her eyes, and the way she tucked a wayward lock of hair behind her ear. He pursued the visions, but they vanished when he reached for them. He revisited their old haunts, the cafe where she painted, the park bench where they whispered vows, and the pathways they used to walk together. Her absence haunted the locations like a ghost. He penned and signed letters that were never mailed. He practiced apologizing, confessing, and pleading. He packed a small blank canvas in his luggage, hoping she'd return and finish it. However, the canvas remained untouched. One evening, the wind ripped open the windows, scattering old photographs across the floor. He knelt and gathered them. A snapshot of their first trip with her hand in his, one of her lying against his shoulder, smiling softly, and another of her standing alone by the sea. He hugged her photos close and sobbed quietly. He said into the darkness, "Come back." However, she never did. Seasons change. The flowers she depicted in her childhood had flowered elsewhere. He planted wildflowers in her remembrance, bright orange ones she used to enjoy. They sprung up in the yard she once watered. He watched them blossom bittersweet. He tried to move forward. He spent his days working, spending time with friends and following a routine. He attempted to chuckle again. But he still had an emptiness inside of him. Memories pulse. The sensation of her shoulder against his, the warmth of her flesh, and the way she breathed while asleep. He occasionally heard whispers, her name in the crowd, an echo of her voice in a stranger's tone. He turned, partly believing she would be there. But always emptiness. Years later, he discovered a little box stowed away in a drawer containing her old paintbrushes, a faded sketch, and a pressed flower between pages. He touched them with shaky fingertips. The scent of paint, her presence, brought back all of the old aches. In the twilight of his life, he sits by the window watching the wildflowers grow. His hands are lined and his hair is silvery. But those evenings live on in his gaze, as does the echo of those 5 words. He sometimes speaks into the dusk, "I wish you had stayed." But the quiet responds. The nights became longer as time passed, yet they felt emptier. He became a man of routine, with each day guided by habit rather than enthusiasm. Mornings were calm, with coffee he poured for 2, but drank alone. Evenings ended with him staring at the wall, leaving the chair opposite him untouched. He began to measure time in terms of lost anniversaries rather than calendar dates. The day she initially told him she loved him. The day they first kissed. The day she spoke those 5 words which ripped his world apart. Each date left a scar in his heart, only to be reopened each year. Sometimes he would roam the old streets at night, retracing her steps. He'd pause under the same street lamp where her hair caught the light, hoping, despite knowing better, that fate would twist and bring her back to him, her shape reappearing through the mist. However, just the shadows met him. He had conversations with her ghost. In his silence, he imagined her responses, her voice faint yet steady. When he felt upset with himself, he envisioned her soft scolding. When he felt proud, he pictured her smiling. It was all he had left. Shards of her woven into the void. Years later, he heard whispers about distant acquaintances. She had relocated far away, lived peacefully, and began painting again. He imagined her in a small house by the sea, her canvases bursting with wildflowers and the windows wide open to let in the salt air. He imagined her standing barefoot on the shore, her hair twisted in the breeze, her heart lighter without him. That notion hurt him, but it also made him feel better. He convinced himself that if she could find peace even without him, then perhaps her decision to go was correct. However, a selfish part of him wished she had chosen differently. On certain evenings, he had dreams about her homecoming. In those dreams she walked back through the door, her eyes softer, her lips trembling with unspoken thoughts. He would grab her hand, hug her close and breathe her in. They would sit together in silence with no explanations or excuses, only presence. Then he would awaken, his chest throbbing from the emptiness of his arms. As he got older, he stopped pretending he'd see her again. The optimism faded but did not die, glowing weakly like the final ember of a fire. He learned to live with the absence but never entirely with it. He sat in his chair by the window one evening as the sun began to set, coloring the horizon gold and scarlet. The wildflowers in the yard swung in the air, their beautiful faces turned toward the dying light. He thought of her one final time, not with sadness over her departure, but with excitement over her presence. She laughed. Her touch. She used to gaze at him as if he were the center of her world. A tear streamed down his cheek as he said into the silence, "Thank you for loving me, even for a while." And for the first time in years he felt whole, even if just for a brief period.